and it's started recording. Okay. So please introduce yourself.
Hey there. So I'm Dan Ellis. I'm an anesthesiologist at Mass General Hospital. I'm also one of the medical directors of the Mass General Physician Organization within MGH.
Great. Okay, so what are your official titles? Like all that
Sounds
jazz.
good. I've got about three different titles. So the first one is that I'm the Assistant Division Chief of the Anesthesia Department at Massachusetts General Hospital. And that's responsible for general surgery anesthesia. So essentially every type of surgery from the neck down, excluding the heart and lungs. I am also one of the assistant medical directors at the Mass General Physician Organization. So that job is a job where I'm responsible for like project management of a bunch of different initiatives that the hospital has going on. So, how do we run the programs that keep our patients healthy and safe and are also cost effective? And the final job that I have is that I'm a staff administrator. And what that means is I'm responsible for about 60 operating rooms and 20 non-operating locations. Like a non-operating location is like labor and delivery, or like endoscopy, colonoscopies, things like that. So that when I'm in that role, I have to make sure that we have the right people in the right place to take care of the scheduled patients and then also the emergency patients, emergency cases that come.
Sweet. Okay, so what are your like day-to-day duties just like in the regular office, in the operating rooms, all over?
Yeah. So when I'm an anesthesiologist, so when I'm taking care of patients, it comes in essentially one of two forms. Either I'm providing direct patient care, and that means that I have one patient in front of me, and I take care of them from when they're awake to when they fall asleep for the procedure, all the way till waking up and when I leave the patient in the recovery room. Because Mass General is a training institution, we have residents from a variety of specialties, mostly anesthesia, but occasionally, like some surgeons rotate through our service, etc. And when I'm working with one of our residents, I'm responsible for teaching them about anesthesia, teaching them about what's going on with the patient. And in that particular situation, I'll also usually run a different room. So I'll have at least two, sometimes up to four operating rooms that I'm responsible for. So there's always someone with the patient, but if I'm the supervising anesthesiologist, then I will cover multiple rooms. So I'll be responsible for simultaneous operations. So there'll be someone in each room, and I'll go ahead and care for the patients that way. If I am a staff administrator, then it's really more of kind of like a paperwork job. I have to make sure that I get the right people to the right place. So a lot of it, it's kind of like moving chess pieces around, making sure I've got enough people in the right spots to take care of the job that we got to do. If I'm doing administrative things, at the moment it's a lot of Zoom meetings, so I'm on my computer a lot. Before that, it was wearing a suit, because that's evidently what you got to do when you're grown up, which I guess I am, and just meeting with a whole bunch of people. And it's like a back-to-back set of meetings.
Yeah, that paperwork part's when I get to see you in Mom's office.
That is exactly right.
Some of my favorite days.
They're fun days. It's a nice break in the day,
Yeah.
and it's amazing how much stuff just comes up. But those are my administrative days.
Okay. So, what, if any, were the high school requirements to be accepted? So, like, ACT, SAT scores, GPA, or any required courses?
For medical school, there are a few medical schools that are combined with college. It's a combined program where you're accepted to both college and med school at the same time. I didn't attend one of those because I didn't know I wanted to be a doctor at that point. So for me, I had to take the SAT. I took the SAT, and I did okay on it. I actually did pretty well, but not great. I think my score was like a 1270 out of 1600 at the time. Is what the reference was. I don't actually know what it is now.
It's about the same now.
About the same. Okay, so I got a 1270, and then my GPA was quite good. So I just applied to college with that. So there was nothing in particular with respect to high school to get, at least get into med school, but I definitely needed, good scores to get into college. But in college, I was in the business school. Like, I was not the typical pre-med major. In fact, it took me about 2 years to switch to pre-med. I thought I'd be a lawyer. And I realized that I did not like doing research in libraries and typing stuff on computers, which is odd because I do a lot of that now. But like, I didn't like that. I didn't want to be stuck in an office. So I started looking around. And medicine felt like a good fit. It felt like a way to help people and make a difference. And so I had to take what they call the pre-med core, because there isn't actually a pre-med major, but there's a pre-med core. It's like a year of physics, a year of basic biology, a year of general chemistry, a year of organic chemistry, some calculus in there. I think that's it. Some schools wanted some of them wanted microbiology. I think some wanted biochemistry. Most of the Texas schools, which is where I'm from, did not want that, so I didn't take them. But I didn't do anything really advanced in terms of the sciences as an undergraduate.
Interesting, because I know now it's like, even just to get into certain colleges, they want you to take X amount of courses or like certain math classes. So it's interesting to see how it is like in different parts of the country.
Yeah, and truthfully, I don't know that there's a right recipe. I don't know that there's a right approach. I would just I advise people to do what they find interesting, do what they find that motivates them and what they're passionate about. One of the most prominent, actually the most prominent psychoanalyst, psychiatrist in the country, he's the guy who was consulted for The Sopranos. He was a drama major in college. There's another guy, Adam Shire, who I know peripherally through friends. He's famous because he invented Siri. He wasn't a rock star in college by his own admission. In fact, he went to speak to UCLA where he went to college, or went to grad school there, and he went back to talk to his program and said, hey, I probably wouldn't have been accepted if I'd applied today. But his advice was to just do what you love and do what motivates you, because you'll be good at it and you'll make a difference out of it. And I think that's probably the best advice, but I promise I'll get off my soapbox.
It's fine. So obviously you mentioned that you attended a college and med school. What were those, and how long did each of those take, and how long did they take combined?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Texas at Austin for my undergraduate, and that ended up being 5 years. And it was 5 years because I was in the College of Business, and I also did all the pre-med requirements. And I was kind of late to the game, switching over to medicine, so that took a little extra time. So for me, it was 5 years of undergraduate, and then med school is 4 years. There's some programs that'll be longer, like you can do a year of research. You could do a master's in public health as a med student. You could also get a master's in business. Some programs have like a combined law degree too. So there's all these other like pathways you could choose, or get a PhD at the same time. That's unusual. Most people just go straight through, and it's about 4 years. So for me, the total time was 9 years before I entered residency, and that's like the additional training.
So what ended up being the cost of all of that? So college, the undergrad, and then the med school.
So college for me, I went to a state school, and this is in 1997 is when I started. And the cost of college was $4,000 a year. That was tuition and fees. So total cost there was about $20,000 for the 5 years. Doesn't include living expenses. Texas isn't that expensive, so I could live in Austin, have a really, really good life for not that much. Then med school was Baylor College of Medicine. It is a private school, but Baylor cut this funky deal with the state of Texas where it received a lot of funding from the state. And so my med school tuition was the same as an in-state med school tuition. That was about $8,000 a year. So 32. So total all in for me was 52,000. Now there's a time difference. So in the spirit of being fair for comparison, you probably should double it. And that's a little overestimation of what I spent. But that's probably pretty accurate.
Okay, the next. So, obviously you mentioned residency. Was there any other kind of post-high school training you had?
Post-high school, no. I mean, I went straight from high school to college, and I started with summer school in, I think it was late June slash early July of 1997. So right after I finished high school, I took a little time off, and then I went straight into school. I'd recommend against doing that to folks who are graduating, especially now. I would take the time, if you're able to, if you're financially able to, and just kind of enjoy the moment and do something interesting, because it's a unique time in your life when you're in a time of change, time of transition. And like I said, if you're able to, it could be a really cool life experience for you. Um, but no, I didn't have any post high school training. I don't know that it helped or hurt me. I mean, I went straight ahead and I started my classes early, but I don't know that it was really a value add.
Okay, so what kind of degree is required to become an anesthesiologist besides just your basic? Is it just your basic med, like doctor degree, or is there anything special you need?
Yeah, so you need a medical degree first off. So you don't necessarily need a college degree because a lot of med schools will take people without a college degree, which is a little odd, right? Like some of the programs you can skip your last year of college and go straight into med school, and you'll end up with an MD, but no like bachelor's degree or no associate's degree. But to get into a residency program, you have to finish a medical program, either a doctor of osteopathy, a medical degree, or the British equivalent of that. You have to have one of those degrees. Then you got to finish like a year of internship, which is where you are essentially a well-rounded. They call it a house officer. That's like an old school term where the house officer was the doctor who was assigned to the house, the hospital, and took care of patients on a ward. And a ward's just a funky term, which means a place where a whole bunch of patients are. So the house officer was responsible for all of those patients on the ward. And you have to do that for about a year. And you could do it on a medicine floor, on a surgical floor, on a pediatrics floor. It doesn't really matter, but that's your intern year. After your intern year, you can prescribe medicines. Most state laws won't let you, in fact, all state laws require an intern year to prescribe medicines to get your licensing through the state. So once you have that license, you can actually write prescriptions. So after your intern year, then you do anesthesia, and that's about 3 years additional. So all in 4 years after I became a doctor. And that was my training.
Awesome. So obviously you mentioned that you internshipped. Did you also do a residency as well?
I did. So that first year was internship, and then the last 3 years are residency. So residency is like this weird term. It's kind of like a square is a rectangle. You know, you can use them kind of interchangeably if you want to. So residency is like a whole package. It's all of the training you need to become like a specialist. So for me, for an anesthesiologist, it's 4 years total. But if you really want to be specific, the first of the 4 years is your intern year, which I hope to never have to do again because it wasn't that much fun. And then the next 3 years were the actual anesthesia residency. Can't do the 3 years without the intern year. So all in 4 years.
Awesome. So how did you become part of the MGH team? Because obviously you mentioned that you were from Texas. What brought you here?
Yeah, so born and raised in Texas, schooled in Texas, trained in Texas, private practice in Texas. What brought me to Massachusetts and Boston specifically was my husband, well, my at the time partner, now husband, and we'd gone to med school together, and he finished up his residency, so he'd also done 4 years of training. And then he did a fellowship, which is additional training on top of that, and he did his fellowship at Cambridge Health Alliance. So Mass General at the time provided anesthesia to Cambridge Health Alliance. So when Cecil moved up here for his training, I had to decide between staying in Texas at a job that I liked, private practice I liked, and moving up to Boston. And I decided to move to Boston. And so I applied for the job, was hired, and ended up working at MGH, at that time the Cambridge division, but ultimately I moved to the main campus in Beacon Hill.
Wow, that's cool. So you kind of mentioned in the beginning a little bit about it. What is MGPO and what exactly is your role within it?
Yeah, so the MGPO is the physician organization in Mass General. So MGH, when you think about it, is all of the big glass shiny buildings in Beacon Hill. But it's really broken up into two halves, and truthfully, it took me years to figure this out. So the two halves are like the building itself, the bricks, the mortar, all of the equipment in it, all of the nursing staff who works there, everybody who works in the cafeteria, the folks who clean, the building and grounds people. You can think about it, everybody who would make that hospital work, that's divided up into like the hospital corporation. The only group that's not a part of that are the doctors. There are a few holdouts. I can think of one holdout actually who's not a part of the doctors organization, and that's the Mass General Physician Organization. So essentially two halves. So the doctors and then like the building, the grounds, et cetera, et cetera. So my role within the MGPO, the physician organization, is that I'm responsible for a couple projects. So the project that I'm primarily responsible for is what we call enhanced recovery after surgery. So the short version of, and that's ERAS. So the short version on ERAS is how do you get patients in and out of the hospital faster, with fewer complications, with less cost? Because we spend way too much money on healthcare in this country. How do you do it for the least amount of money but still have a really awesome outcome? And that's what the program's about. So it's not just what I do in the operating room. It's not just what the surgeon does. It has to do with getting the patient ready, getting them is like in the best shape possible for surgery. How do you manage their pain in the recovery room? How do you like get them up and moving on the floors? I described them as wards earlier. When they hit the wards, how do you get them up to move? And how do you get them out so that they don't have a complication, they don't have an infection, they don't get a blood clot, and they're able to go home with little pain and little nausea as possible. So that's a program that I'm involved in, and it's been incredibly successful. So we've started with one group, and we're pushing it out across all of the different like types of surgery that we're doing at Mass General, and it's all like data driven. Reports are made, et cetera, et cetera. So my job with that, and actually we were talking about technology earlier, like my first couple meetings of the day starting at 7 a.m. were about this. It talks about like how do we refine our product, how do we refine our process, how do I get like reports together that show what it is that we do. So a lot of the work at the MGPO is meetings, looking at Excel spreadsheets, it's PowerPoint presentations, Zoom, stuff like that.
So going off of my list for a minute, you mentioned like some of the stuff you do, like getting the patients ready for surgery, then like walk us through like a day of surgery, what you do, start to finish.
It's a typical day for me if I'm working in the ORs. So the alarm goes off at 5:30 in the morning. I have some coffee with my dog. I have to walk her, and then I head on into the hospital. And at about 7 o'clock is when that gets started. So I'll set up my room, so I get all my medications drawn up. I will go visit with the patient, start an intravenous line, um, go through their history and physical, and make sure nothing has changed from when we called them on the phone. There's a team that does phone screens that calls all the patients beforehand. Check the labs, make sure everything looks good before they come into the operating room. Bring them in, have them fall asleep, check on their vital signs, their blood pressure, the heart rate, etc. Take care of their airway, make sure it's safe, make sure that they're on a machine that can breathe for them when they're asleep, that we've got enough medications to not only keep them safe, but also keep them in a deep sleep during the surgery, make sure they don't have pain when they wake up, make sure they're not nauseous when they wake up, because that really stinks. And then get them out to the recovery room afterwards. And then it's rinse and repeat. Pick up the next patient and do it all over again.
Awesome. So how much do you make now versus when you started at MGH and like when you were in Texas?
So when I started medicine, I was an intern. I made $39,000 that year. And I felt like I was loaded because rather than paying the hospital money to be there as a med student, they were actually paying me to be there and giving me meal tickets, which were really good because there was a McDonald's in the hospital cafeteria. we can get into that later because that brings up all sorts of like ethical questions. But they had McFlurries that were pretty fantastic. Anyway, so I started at 39, I went to like 40 or 41, 42, 43 until I graduated. When I became an attending, which is like when I finished all my residency, that number increased by a bunch, which was great. Texas paid less than Massachusetts, but Massachusetts has more taxes, and the cost of living was significantly higher in Boston than it was in Houston, which is the place that I left. That number changes a bit depending on call, depending on how late I stay, if I take vacation, things like that. But it's nice. I can, I'm in a place that's really comfortable financially. I can, order a meal at a restaurant and feel comfortable with that, or buy things that I would like to do. And make sure my dog gets enough chew toys, things like important things like that.
Of course. So the next question I wrote was, why and to whom would you recommend this job?
So I'd recommend this job to someone who really enjoys taking care of another person and getting them through a really tough time in their life. What I do, it's one of the most profound. This is going to sound cheesy, but it's really one of the more profound things out there. Like, I get a patient through one of the most challenging, difficult, stressful, anxiety-provoking times in their lives. They're coming in to have surgery. They're coming in to be cut open. And it's my job to keep you safe, to keep you asleep, to make it as stress-free as possible. And that feels really, really good. That, more than the money, is what gets me out of bed in the morning.
So, I've done finished the list of questions. Is there any funny stories that you want to share?
Funny stories?
Yeah. Has anything like
work related
crazy ever happened during a surgery, or like? Because like I always hear stories of people waking up, and that is so scary.
You mean waking up in the middle of the surgery?
Yeah. Has that ever happened?
It doesn't happen.
Doesn't really happen.
No, it can happen.
It happened to Mom.
Did it? I'll have to talk to Renee about that. It's super rare for that to happen, especially now. So the times that it does happen, the places where you're more likely to have it than not, is like an emergency surgery. So let's say that you're in a really bad car accident and you had to have like life-saving surgery. In that case, you're at increased risk just because like your blood pressure's low, your heart's not working well, like something's really wrong with you that you need this like super like traumatic surgery right then, can't wait, gotta have it to save your life. Same thing with heart surgery, emergency heart surgery. If your blood pressure's that low, if your heart's that messed up, if you really need that kind of emergency surgery, then you are at increased risk. Emergency C-section, where you have to be asleep for it. If the baby's not doing well and you have to go to surgery and it's an emergency and we're doing something to save your life, you're picking up on the theme here, then that's a time when you are more likely to have it happen than not. So the theme there is, or the consistency is that it has to do with an emergency. Now, could it happen to anybody? It could happen. Is it likely to happen, especially now? Because we've got really good drugs now, and we have like new monitors that like monitor brain waves. Highly unlikely. Highly, highly unlikely. With those carve-outs, right? Like, if you come in and you've just been hit by like a Mack truck or something like that, then
Lord.
Sure, it does increase your risk. But that's not normal. Like, you ain't getting hit by a Mack truck every day. You shouldn't be coming in for emergency heart surgery all the time. There's something seriously wrong if you keep coming in for an emergency heart surgery. So those are really the carve-outs that we see that. But yeah, it absolutely could happen, and that's scary. That scares me. Like, I wouldn't want that. I don't want that for my patients.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all of the questions I have, so I'm gonna stop the recording. I don't know if you want to leave any parting words.
No particularly parting words, but it's really awesome that y'all are asking these questions and thinking about like next steps. It's certainly further along than I was when I was in your shoes. So I think it's great.